This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
After their virtual summit, Presidents Xi Jinping and Joe Biden vowed to restore bilateral ties and work together on climate change. Blinken calls for Ethiopia's ceasefire as conflict threatens Horn of Africa region. And the Africa CDC director says the continent has accelerated efforts to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines locally. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the very latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next 30 minutes. South Africa's inflation rate remains virtually unchanged compared to the previous month, ahead of a key rate decision on Thursday. And traders in Ghana calling for tax relief amid a rise in the cost of living as headline inflation hits a 15-month high. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. We'll see you in a bit. Well, China and Israel say that they will continue to promote healthy bilateral ties. The remarks come from a phone conversation between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Israeli counterpart Isaac Herzog. Both countries are marking 3 decades of diplomatic relations next year. President Xi said that China would mark it as an opportunity to promote their partnership. He also said that China highly valued its relations with Israel and was ready to work for more mutual benefits. Well, the White House says engagement with Beijing will intensify on multiple levels, following up on the two presidents' pledge to manage competition to avoid conflict between the world's 2 biggest economies. Nathan King has more.
Warm words from the two heads of state as their first face-to-face encounter began. President Xi called President Biden an old friend. Biden returned the compliment and said next time he wanted to meet in person. But as the talk stretched past 3 hours, it was clear this was about the details of the most important bilateral relationship, not just the pleasantries. While there were no immediate breakthroughs, the US did restate its commitment to the One China policy and disavowed any moves in support of Taiwan independence.
President Biden underscored his commitment to the One China policy, which is guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances. He also reminded President Xi that he voted for the Taiwan Relations Act as a senator, and so he understands deeply, firsthand, that the act makes clear that any effort to shape Taiwan's future by other than peaceful means is of grave concern to the United States.
Other promising signs, warm words over working together more closely on climate, global public health, energy and supply chain security. And the US said that the trade representative is looking into enforcing the terms of the Phase 1 trade deal, which could lead to the lowering of tariffs. There are also more signals from the US about granting more visas to Chinese journalists and potentially other groups as well. But perhaps the most significant achievement of these meetings was the fact that the tone was much warmer than we've seen in the frosty exchanges over the past few years. That will act as a stabilizing force both in Washington and in Beijing and come as a relief to many capitals in the region of the Asia Pacific and around the rest of the world. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the White House.
Well, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation will soon open in Senegal. China's Ministry of Commerce held a press conference Wednesday outlining the agenda of the forum and some of the major trade and economic achievements between China and Africa in recent years. CGTN's Xiao Xufeng has more.
The 8th Ministerial Conference on the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation will be held in Dakar, Senegal at the end of this month, with 55 member countries expected to participate. In the press conference, China's Ministry of Commerce outlined a general agenda of this year's forum.
We will work together on setting new measures in accordance with our development strategies. The new measures should be in line with China's vision of 2035 and the adaptation of dual-cycle development. For Africa, the measure should also align with the African Union's 2063 agenda.
The last forum was held in 2018 in Beijing, and for the past 3 years, the China-Africa Trade and Economic Cooperation has made solid progress. In the first 9 months this year, the trade volume reached a record of $185.2 billion, up by 38.2% year-on-year.
China's export of construction machinery and daily necessities has met both the production and living needs of those in Africa. To China, Africa is an important source of many mineral resources, an important element in maintaining the stability of our industrial chain. In recent years, we have also taken active measures to expand the import of non-resource-based products from Africa.
China not only has put great emphasis in trading goods with Africa, and also cooperated to help improve their economic development, virus control strategies, and the livelihood of African people.
We successfully held the China-Africa Summit on solidarity against COVID-19, in which we agreed to prioritize our cooperation on public health. With Africa's development needs and debt, we optimized the structure of financial support and helped guide financial institutions.
The world has been facing many challenges since the last forum, notably COVID-19 and global economy recovery. China says it is willing to work with African countries to address these issues and build a China-Africa community with a shared future. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Beijing.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has reiterated his earlier calls for a ceasefire in the Ethiopian conflict. Blinken, who spoke in Nairobi during his official visit to Kenya, has described the crisis as a growing risk to the unity and integrity of the Ethiopian state. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
On his first leg of a 3 African nations tour, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for an unconditional ceasefire in the Ethiopian conflict. Blinken urged the Tigrarian-led forces to stop their threatened advance on the country's capital, Addis Ababa, and urged both sides to embrace political dialogue.
It is very important that the differences, the conflicts be resolved by people sitting down at the table, talking, discussing, negotiating. And that needs to be done, in my judgment, pursuant to the constitutional order, including with the duly elected leaders of the country, Prime Minister Abiy.
We believe in the potential of Ethiopia to find a resolution to this crisis. We believe that a ceasefire is possible. We believe that the other conditions regarding humanitarian access are possible. We must believe in the fortitude and the wisdom of the Ethiopian people, because in the end, these solutions will come from them.
The U.S. Secretary of State also raised concerns about continued atrocities committed against civilians in the ongoing conflict.
We have seen, we continue to see atrocities being committed, people suffering, and regardless of what we call it, it needs to stop. And there needs to be accountability. And we're determined that there will be.
Kenya has pledged to continue engaging the two parties and support ongoing efforts to end the conflict.
What we must do as neighbors is to support, is to counsel, is to hold hands, is to point in the right direction to ensure that this crisis, when it ends, and we believe it will end, will leave Ethiopia a stronger nation, will leave Ethiopia a stronger partner, and a country that is able once again to guarantee the peace in our region.
Blinken is also scheduled to hold a high-level discussion with the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, to find a lasting solution to the conflict.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, my brother.
After Kenya, Blinken will visit Nigeria before ending his tour in Senegal. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Meanwhile, the UN says that 10 of its local staff are still being held by security agencies in Ethiopia. The government says that they are in custody for violating the recently imposed state of emergency and could be tried in a court of law once investigations are completed. However, 34 out of the 70 drivers arrested have been released, and CGTN's Gurum Chala now reports the war in northern Ethiopia continues despite international efforts to end it.
The United Nations continued calling on Ethiopian authorities to release its employees who are still being detained over what Addis Ababa said is a breach of the state of emergency rules. 10 staff and 34 drivers are still in prison, according to the UN. Authorities at the Foreign Ministry told us the federal police has already released most UN workers arrested after the investigation was completed. The case for the rest of the detained suspects is being handled by the security team formed under the state of emergency. Ethiopian officials have reiterated anyone either belonging to the UN or AU who breaks the nation's law will be held accountable. On the other hand, war continues in the north, especially in the Amhara and Afar regions. We have received reports from the government source that TPLF forces are losing strategic locations to the ENDF.
An organized militia, the youth of Amhara known as Fanos, the Oromo tribe militia and the brave National Defense Force, as well as our Air Force, are repelling the blindly marching rebel force. They have now started a strong offensive, finishing their defensive works. Due to that, the town of Kemise is under a roundup by our forces. This is because people have responded to the government's call to defend their nation.
It has been quite some time now since Ethiopia declared a state of emergency to, quote, better secure the country. Life in Addis Ababa and other major cities remains normal.
We're going to school and everything is going peacefully, as we can see. And we didn't see anything new since the state of emergency. As I told you, everything is going well. Everything is going as normal and as before.
Since this state of emergency, we are better defending our country following the war waged against it. It's peaceful here, and we have continued supporting the government's effort at the war front. We consider this a necessary step for our security, and we have to prepare for anything needed to maintain our sovereignty.
As the war continues, the humanitarian situation in the north remains worrying. Humanitarian agencies have warned that this needs to be addressed as soon as possible to avoid any catastrophe. Meanwhile, the UN has released $40 million towards Ethiopia's humanitarian assistance efforts, part of which is meant for the northern region where conflict still rages on. Gurum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In Sudan, several rallies have taken place across the capital, Khartoum. Security forces fired tear gas on protesters who are against the military coup. Ahead of the demonstrations, authorities closed 4 out of 10 bridges linking Khartoum with the cities of Bahri and Omdurman. Since the coup on October the 25th, telephone lines have been cut and internet services disrupted. The army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was sworn in last week as head of a new transitional council. He was appointed to lead the country pro-democracy groups, which have promised to continue protesting until the return to civilian rule. Well, meanwhile, the head of Kenya's prison service has been fired. This comes after 3 inmates convicted of terror-related offenses escaped a maximum security prison. The Commissioner General of the Kenya Prison Service, Wycliffe Ogalo, was immediately replaced by Brigadier John Warobia. President Uhuru Kenyatta released a statement announcing Ogalo's dismissal. Authorities have also arrested 7 prison wardens in connection with the inmates' escape. Kenya's Interior Cabinet Secretary says their escape was aided by laxity and incompetence. Well, China and Tanzania are evaluating an agricultural project the 2 countries jointly initiated nearly 10 years ago. Agricultural cooperation between Beijing and Tanzania aims to boost maize production, ensure food security, and lift farmers out of poverty. A virtual meeting with representatives from both countries was held on Tuesday. Agricultural experts and the UN Office for South-South Cooperation officials also attended the gathering.
The meeting aims to assess the project named Small Technology Big Harvest. It was started in Tanzania's Morogoro region nearly 10 years ago. During the meeting, project participants from China and Tanzania spoke on the achievements, challenges, and explained their next plans to improve agricultural production.
The target of this project was to reach 2,000 farmers, but up to now we've reached 1,665 farmers, equivalent to 83% of the target.
The project introduced Chinese farming technology and emphasized cooperation among local farmers, universities, and local government. It initially started with less than 100 farmers in PP village, but it has spread to 10 villages across the Morogoro region.
It is 9 years since I joined to facilitate this project. Of course, I got good harvests because at the beginning I was getting 3, 4 to 5 bags per acre, but now I can get 15 to 18 bags in 1 acre. Previously, it was too hard to harvest to that quantity.
The farmers say their family income and quality of life have improved since joining the project.
When I started to cultivate, I saw the achievement. I've managed to purchase a motorcycle. I've constructed a house. Previously, I had a 4-roomed house, but now I have a 9-roomed house.
Tanzania hopes the existing cooperation with Chinese agricultural experts will bring more fruitful impacts to the sector and people's livelihood.
China has provided approximately 80 million to FAO since 2009 through phases of a trust fund to support the FAO China South-South Cooperation Program. Through the program, more than 290 Chinese agricultural extension technicians were deployed in 12 countries, directly benefiting more than 70,000 people in rural areas and indirectly benefiting several hundreds of thousands of people.
Agriculture is one of the key important sectors of Tanzania's economy, as it contributes to over 29% of the GDP. The sector employs over 65% of Tanzanians. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More in Africa Live, including scientists warn of dangers from ocean acidification. And Zimbabwe sets a December 31st deadline for civil servants to get vaccinated. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, scientists have warned that life on Earth could become impossible unless countries stop the toxic chemical pollution of oceans. According to the Global Oceanic Environmental Survey, the world risks losing the marine ecosystem and biodiversity in the next 25 years, along with a food supply for 2 billion people due to ocean acidification. CGTN's Daniel Aramoy brings us that report.
Under the blue, serene ocean waters, the ocean is bubbling with life. These marine creatures call this place home. But their ability to survive under the ocean is being tested by a new threat: ocean acidification.
Over the next 25 years, when the pH drops to 7.95, we're going to lose up to 90% of all life in the oceans. And we depend upon marine life for our survival. So absolutely, it's really very critical that we prevent this.
Scientists say the burning of fossil fuels is making the ocean more acidic as carbon dioxide is released into the air. About 30% of this odorless and invisible gas is reportedly absorbed by the oceans.
Now, the mechanism that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is nature. It's marine life, it's plants, primarily marine plants. And if we allow ocean acidification to take place, then we'll lose the marine plants and the ability to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then we'll have runaway climate change.
Millions of people worldwide rely on food from the ocean as their primary source of protein. Scientists now fear that their extinction could threaten human existence. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is among 110 countries that have committed to end deforestation by 2030. The country plans to achieve that by planting 1 billion trees and prioritizing renewable energy products in its new projects. The commitment was made at the recently concluded UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. World leaders also agreed to establish a fund of $1.4 billion to protect the Congo Basin rainforest. CGTN's Christopher Moringa has more from Kinshasa.
A forest under threat. The Congo Basin is the world's second largest rainforest after the Amazon. It straddles 6 African countries and plays a crucial role in keeping the world's carbon dioxide levels in check. 60% of this dense rainforest is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over the past 2 decades, many trees in the forest have been cut due to the clearing of land for agriculture, industrial logging, and a lucrative charcoal trade.
Our populations, as you know, are very poor. So they don't have enough energy, especially hydro energy or other sources of electrical energy. That's why they use mainly woods to make fire. This is the first reason. The second reason, as I said, is the fact that people are exporting our woods by cutting trees.
According to an international NGO that monitors forests, Global Forest Watch, the DRC lost 15.9 million hectares of tree cover between 2001 and 2020. World leaders who attended the recent climate change conference in Glasgow committed to set a $1.4 billion fund to protect the Congo Basin rainforest. Jean Imbotaka is a native of the DRC's western province of Bandundu, which has a large forest reserve.
If we are really going to receive money from the COP26 summit, part of it should be used to construct roads and bridges for the communities living near the forests. That will help reduce the cutting of trees. The government will also collect more taxes as a result of increased business activity.
The DRC government recently suspended illegal logging concessions in a bid to conserve its forests. And President Felix Tshisekedi committed to plant more trees during the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow.
Accroître notre contribution déterminée au niveau national en la portant à 21%.
We have decided to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 21% by 2030. We will also plant 1 billion trees by 2023 and include more renewable energy sources in our country.
1 milliard d'arbres à l'horizon 2023.
Cutting trees contributes to climate change because it depletes forests that absorb large amounts of carbon dioxide. While the financial pledge to protect the Congo Basin rainforest has been welcomed by many Congolese, some environmentalists say a previous deal in 2014 failed to slow deforestation.
The DRC government has expressed its commitment to end deforestation, but it faces a huge challenge of rooting out armed groups that are engaged in illegal logging and the destruction of the forest's rich biodiversity. Many citizens hope a military operation launched earlier this year will stop the illegal activities and enable the country to contribute to tackling climate change. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Over in South Africa, engineers have built one of Africa's greenest buildings in Cape Town. The owners of the property, called The Ridge, had envisioned a green building, and engineers came up with several solutions. One of them, a very simple and sustainable alternative that even school children were able to chip in with the construction work. CGTN's Julie Shaya has more.
As the effects of climate change become every day more challenging, simple solutions have had to be found. Here at Edo School, students churned out eco-bricks used to fill the voids of the Ridge building in Cape Town.
There are eco-bricks available throughout our communities. It's a very community-focused initiative,
And there's so much value in that, and I know that EcoBrick Exchange are working hard to create a value so that it's not only about the material, but it's about the people who are collecting in the environment to create these EcoBricks.
This is a first in terms of commercial application of EcoBricks in a corporate building, and it's a great example of a teamwork between the property owner and the tenant. So in this building there are 12,500 EcoBricks.
All similar to that?
Yeah, and they are underneath, they're within the floor of the bathroom.
The ridge is fitted with a smart energy system contributing to a lighter carbon footprint.
One of the key moves that we made in this building was to imagine it as a step in this transition towards net zero and, in fact, carbon positive, to be in a place where we can design buildings that aren't extracting from the environment, but are actually giving back to their environment.
The ridge incorporates design elements that save energy, setting the tone for other future green buildings.
What we can do next, what can we do better, and looking at the targets to try and hit our net carbon zero in 2035, because that's just a target of where we're getting to. We've got to go a lot further than that. So the ridge, I think, is really us as the V&A waterfront showing the industry what is possible in a commercial environment to deliver a building that really does do all the commercial things it needs to do, but does it in a way that's very, very sensitive to the environment.
That's a huge part of this journey, is the behavior change. And that ties in very well with climate change, because this is the journey that we're all on, that the world is on, to understand how serious climate change is.
Where there's a will, there's a way, and this building is an example of how communities can work together with big corporates and make a positive change in the environment. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that countries on the continent have accelerated efforts to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines locally. They've done this in partnership with Western countries as well as China. Speaking exclusively to CGTN's Guillaume Chala, the Africa CDC's director, Dr. John Nkarasong, said that COVID-19 had become a security threat for the continent and had to be addressed collectively.
Dr. John Nkarasong, thank you so much on behalf of CGTN. Africa continues to lag behind in vaccination campaign, with only 5 countries likely to beat the December deadline to vaccinate at least 40% of their population. How worrying is this really?
It is very worrying, absolutely very worrying. As a continent of 1.2 billion people, we have only been able to immunize about 5.5% of our population. And we now know that the target is to try to immunize at least 70% of the population by the end of next year if we have to get rid of this virus, which is a virus we must get rid in order to survive. We have seen how disruptive the virus is in terms of human life loss, in terms of economic loss, and even in terms of security. Okay, and I pushed it a little bit to say national security. So we're at 5%. How do we get to 70% next year? It means we have to build partnerships, we have to develop more cooperation, and we have to develop more solidarity. Solidarity with our friends in the West who are producing the vaccines, cooperation in terms of transfer of technology and intellectual property to developing to Africa's places like Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, that are primed to manufacture vaccines should be enabled by our friends from the West and the East so that they can manufacture vaccines. Partnerships such as the ones that we just developed with the MasterCard Foundation, where they enabled us $1.3 billion in order to facilitate our vaccination exercises there. So those are the kind of things that we must do in order to move from 5% to 70% by the end of next year.
Dr. John, the West appears to be moving towards a post-COVID era. In Africa, we're yet to get there with the low uptake of vaccines. How would you describe the status of Africa?
The status of vaccination in Africa is extremely worrying, and it should be worrying for everybody because this is a virus that we've not known before. This is a virus that we have to be humble enough to say that even though we have learned a lot about this virus, we still have a lot to learn about the virus in terms of how the variants are emerging. A few months ago, we were discussing the Alpha and Beta variant. Today, the predominant conversation is the Delta variant. And we have seen how the Delta variant has challenged even countries that are vaccinated at scale like Israel. Israel was one of the first countries to vaccinate almost in excess of 80% of its population. The Delta variant came, and we see the struggles there. It's true in the United States and others. So the point I'm making is that unless we vaccinate at scale and at speed, including Africa, a continent of 1.2 billion people, we are not out of the woods. We either come out of this collectively or we remain in this collectively, regardless of whether countries have been, in the West have been vaccinated or not.
Dr. John, in his recent speech, President Xi Jinping said, and I quote, "China is willing to work with all parties to improve the accessibility and affordability of COVID-19 vaccines in developing countries." What's your comments on President Xi's speech in G20 on COVID-19 vaccines?
It's very welcome. And remember, I said the formula for us to get out of this pandemic is threefold. We need partnerships, we need cooperation, we need solidarity. So I think that speech squares in with the spirit of partnership, the spirit of cooperation, and the spirit of solidarity. Without those three elements, we will be in here for a very long time. And this is not a virus that we want to live with alongside for a long time. There are two types of pandemics. There are silent pandemics like HIV/AIDS that they kill, but they are not disruptive. Then there are very disruptive pandemics. COVID is one of those. They disrupt the economy. And each time, for example, there's a wave in Africa. We've gone through 3 waves. Each time there's a surge in wave, it costs us $30 billion. $30 billion. Because it's an economic threat, it means that indirectly it is, and even directly, it is a security threat for our people. So that kind of a declaration from the president of China is the spirit of solidarity that the UN Secretary General has called on, the WHO has called on, and we, as Africa CDC, we have been calling on that since the start of the pandemic.
December 31st is the final deadline for unvaccinated civil servants in Zimbabwe to either get the COVID-19 vaccine or lose their jobs. That's according to the country's Public Service Commission, which is finalizing the implementation of the directive that makes vaccination mandatory for government employees. However, some workers have vowed to not comply with the directive despite the consequences. Farai Makotuya reports from Harare.
Irene, not her real name, has been a high school teacher for 27 years. Her career hangs in the balance due to a decision she's made not to get vaccinated against COVID-19.
I have got freedom of choice. I need freedom of choice since the government has policies which protect that. So I feel that I should have a choice to do what I want. We haven't been informed about this vaccination process. If you look at it, from the government's side, it's like the government is just commanding us to do something which we can't make an informed decision on.
Are you not worried about losing your job or not getting paid because your employer is insisting that everyone should get the vaccine?
What I can say is, yes, I may be worried, but at the same time, with the remuneration that we are getting at the moment, it points to the same thing. Even if I don't get paid, I don't feel the difference. So I think I should just wait for what my conscience tells me to do.
Zimbabwe's government has made it mandatory for all public servants to get vaccinated and has given them until December 31st to comply or face disciplinary action, which may include suspension of pay or termination of employment.
According to the Public Service Commission, only 1% of government employees are yet to get inoculated. It says it's currently undertaking the due process, which involves finding out the reasons why they haven't been vaccinated.
Some of the reasons cited for failure to get vaccinated include unavailability of vaccines, difficulties getting them to remote areas, and that some workers are on leave or assigned away from their regular workstations. Mandatory vaccination remains a contentious issue. In August, the main labor union took 7 organizations to court for barring employees from work unless they provided vaccination certificates. The Zimbabwean High Court is yet to make a ruling in the case. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more in Africa Live, but for now, let's take a look at what's happening in business. It's Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa's inflation rate is essentially unchanged compared to the previous month ahead of a key rate decision less than 24 hours away. And traders in Ghana calling for tax relief amid a rise in the cost of living as headline inflation hits a 15-month high.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Let's start in South Africa. The inflation rate over there is essentially unchanged on the eve of a central bank rate announcement that's dividing economists and traders. Headline inflation rose by 5% compared to a year earlier in October, the same essentially as the previous month, according to Statistics South Africa. Headline inflation has been driven higher by rising food costs, but also record high fuel prices, and it's now breached 4.5%. That's the midpoint of the central bank's target range, where it prefers to anchor expectations around, and it's been over that threshold for 6 consecutive months. Now that, coupled with warnings about upside risks to the inflation outlook, could in turn prompt the South African Reserve Bank to lift their benchmark rate on Thursday and signal a more aggressive tightening cycle to come. Now, the implied policy rate path of the central bank's quarterly projection model, which it uses as a guide, indicates a 25 basis point increase should be penciled in the final quarter of this year and in every quarter in 2022 and 2023. The International Monetary Fund said on Tuesday that it was unable to offer any financial support to Zimbabwe due to its unsustainable debt and a whole host of outstanding arrears. The Washington-based lender said after a month-long mission to the Southern African nation that obtaining a financial arrangement would require a clear path to comprehensive restructuring of Zimbabwe's external debt, including plans to clear those arrears and obtaining financing assurances from creditors. Now, Zimbabwe, which has suffered from bouts of hyperinflation over the last 15 years, has not received funding from lenders like the IMF and the World Bank for more than 2 decades because, simply put, it owes them a fair bit of money. Now, the country has more than $10 billion in debt, the bulk of which is currently in arrears. Up north, the unemployment rate in Egypt rose to 7.5% in the third quarter of the year, compared to 7.3% in the second and 7.4% in the first. That's according to the country's statistics agency. The unemployment rate had a significant jump in the second quarter of last year after it rose to 9.6% due to the lockdown in the North African economy, which came into effect in order to try and limit the spread of COVID-19. According to the stats agency, the total labor force in Egypt stood at 29.3 million individuals in the third quarter of the year. That's an increase of nearly 1% over the previous quarter. The agency said that this rise is due to the influx of new graduates coming into the labor market in the months of August and September. Back to East Africa for a moment now. The Tanzanian government, Shell and Equinor have resumed talks regarding a host government agreement for the country's $30 billion LNG project. Now, that project has essentially been on ice since 2019. As CGTN's Daniel Kijo now reports, the government's hoping to reach an agreement with the fossil fuel firms by the end of 2021.
After more than 3 years of pause, the Tanzanian government says it is hoping to come to an agreement with the companies by end of this year. The deal between Tanzania and Royal Dutch Shell and Norwegian company Equinor will see the two companies build an LNG terminal in Lindi. Talks originally started in 2014, but postponement to the previous administration impacted foreign investors' outlook for the industry. Anglo-Dutch giant Shell and Norwegian major Equinox plan to harvest gas from offshore blocks into a plant that can produce 10 million tons of liquefied gas per annum. Along with exporting the gas, the project is expected to offer employment opportunities, support local industries and businesses in its value chain. It is also expected to lower the cost of power generation for Tanzania, which is key for providing cheap energy for its growing industry. The long-awaited host government agreement will spell out the entire project and will establish the commercial, fiscal and legal framework to ensure that the project can move ahead. Officials from the Energy Ministry say the project involves a lot of money and is the duty of the government to ensure the country gets its fair share. They are hoping to finalize all talks in early 2022. Tanzania has an estimated 57.7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
On to West Africa, Nigeria's inflation slowed down to a 10-month low in October as consumer prices went up by just under 16%. Now compare that with September's reading of 16.6%. But as Philly Hazana reports from the nation's federal capital of Abuja, for the majority of people in Africa's largest economy, that change isn't what they're seeing on the ground.
Prices of commodities dropped by 1.23% from last month, but rose slightly by 1.76% when compared to the same month last year. The NBS says inflation rate in urban areas is worse in the rural areas. Products like beverages, eggs, bread, cereals and staple foods are still high in stores like this across the country. In spite of the marginal drop this month, it's a burden for many consumers who think the reality on ground is even worse.
Since this year, we've been experiencing a continuous hike in the cost of goods. The government has to do something about this.
It's really sad that one incomes remain the same, but the number of things you can buy continue to reduce because of all these increments.
Inflation is still something that more than 80 million Nigerians who live below the $1.90 a day will have to deal with. The country's minimum wage is about $80 per month. Nigeria has been battling inflation since bouncing back from a recession last year caused by a COVID-19 pandemic and a fall in crude oil prices, a main source of revenue for the economy. The government says it's optimistic that things will get better as business activities pick up within the country and on a global scale. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Still on the inflation beat, despite being an oil and gas exporter, Ghana too is struggling with rising inflation. Now, supply chain disruptions have led to a surge in retail fuel prices, and that's driving headline inflation to a 15-month high of 11% in October. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai is now reporting traders in the West African nation are calling for tax cuts if their businesses and the jobs they support are to stay alive.
Sadia Umaru is having a slow business day in this market in Accra. She says people are not buying her grains.
When I tell people the price of the grains, they complain it is too expensive. I sit here all day and hardly make any sales.
Sadia says she's had to increase the price of the grains 5 times this year. It's because the cost of transporting the food to the market has gone up due to hikes in fuel prices. So she passes the extra cost to consumers.
I buy the grains from northern Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso and other neighboring countries. And I pay a lot of money to transport the goods to Accra. I barely make profits when I sell the grains.
Fuel prices have gone up 9 times this year in Ghana. The increases in fuel prices are mainly linked to changes on global markets.
But it is already feeding through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. The cost of goods and services have shot up to 11% in October from 10.6% in September.
The government has scrapped some taxes on petroleum products to cushion consumers. It has removed the price stabilization and recovery levy of 16 pesos per litre of petrol and 14 pesos per litre of diesel. But analysts want the government to be more realistic about how it manages the economy.
Make sure whatever you are going to project, you can easily spend to meet that. It's as simple as that. And the people will believe you. But then if you read a budget and you raise the people's hope as if, there's future for petroleum prices, there's future for giving them roads and all those. Meanwhile, the thing is not there. If government takes off taxes, it's going to be suicidal. That's why I said the government needs to come out clear and tell the people that this is the situation we are faced with, and we have to take the pain now for a good future.
Still, Sadia Umaru wants more taxes on fuel to be cut. She believes her business will only bounce back when she is able to reduce the prices of her grains, when she pays less to transport the food. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In Global Business, we'll be analysing Ghana's 2022 budget, which was unveiled by the country's finance minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, some hours ago. Investors have been looking for reassurances that the West African country's debt, which has soared to more than 3/4 of GDP, and there's concern over the rising debt stock, which is basically threatening to derail the economic recovery. So the spending and the tax plan is out, but are investors really convinced? We'll explore that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thanks for that, Robert. We'll see you at the top of the hour. For now, let's take a short break and return. More news, including Egypt opens new pottery village in the heart of Cairo to preserve the ancient craft.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Egypt is opening a new area dedicated to pottery in the heart of Cairo. The AI Fustai property village is made up of 152 workshops. The government in recent years has developed the area to preserve this ancient craft and make it a tourist attraction. CGTN's Adel Amrouki with that report.
Fathi Taha finally gets his workshop back after 15 years. During his 5-decade-long career, pottery has always been his passion. This is Fustat, a city founded in the year 641 to be the first capital for Egypt under Muslim rule. Since then, the place spiraled down into slums that attracted pottery makers until the government decided to revitalize this pottery village in 2005.
We were buried and the state resurrected us. It's a beautiful gift for this village. As much as this development will save the environment, it's also a great benefit to us all. This is a preservation of our heritage. Pottery in Egypt goes back to ancient times. For centuries, Al Fustat has been famous for pottery.
152 potters celebrated the government's handover of their workshops. Returning to business, however, after more than a decade and a half, proved to be very challenging for almost everyone here.
We were buried and the state resurrected us. It's a beautiful gift for this village. As much as this development will save the environment, it is also of great benefit to us all. This is a preservation of our heritage. Pottery in Egypt goes back to ancient times for centuries. Al Fustat has been famous for pottery.
Raising a new generation of potters will be hard work and time consuming. I began learning pottery when I was a kid. At first, your job would be to prepare the clay. I then handed it over to the potter and he would shape it, and I would watch. When I finished it, I took it to the furnace. It took me many years until I started molding clay and took responsibility for an entire workshop.
Rebuilt over 13 acres of land, Cairo hopes that Fustat could once again become a prime tourist attraction. It will be holding routine cultural events here, and to ensure that the pottery village is sustainable, the government supplied workshops with eco-friendly furnaces and all utilities they needed.
The government has started to take care of us. I hope for more. This is a great project which could be better if it gets provided with more support. We need electricity bills to be subsidized. There is more advanced equipment available with advanced technology that could elevate the quality of our products.
These are some of Egypt's most experienced potters. They are maybe resuming their craft too late into their long careers, but they hope it could be a fresh start to build new talents who can take Egyptian pottery art to new heights. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, here's what's coming up in sport. Zimbabwe risks FIFA international ban after government suspends local FA.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
We kick off in Zimbabwe, where the country has become the second African nation to risk an international FIFA ban in as many weeks after Kenya. The sports ministry suspended the Zimbabwe Football Association board for gross incompetence on Tuesday, drawing mixed reaction. CGTN's Farai Magutuya brings us up to speed with the latest developments.
Failure to account for public funds, not acting on sexual harassment allegations against female referees, and unequal treatment of women's national teams are some of the reasons cited by the Sports and Recreation Commission for suspending the ZIFA board. The government sports regulator says it is prepared for any consequences, including a ban by the world's governing body, which condemns interference in football by governments. Analysts say the censure would be worth it.
Definitely the right call, definitely support it. Hopefully there is a plan by the SRC to move football forward, or at least fix some of the problems that will be bedeviling the game, rather than it just being a case of we want these guys out and then we'll think about it as we go. That we get banned is, I think, a collateral damage of a war that needs to be fought. The war that needs to be fought is to bring football back onto normalcy and get football back on the right track.
The Zimbabwe Football Association is yet to comment on the suspension. While the officials at ZIFA House remain tight-lipped, some stakeholders have, through their actions, expressed their feelings about the recent developments. ZIFA appointed match officials boycotted 5 Premier League matches that were scheduled for Tuesday afternoon.
Obviously, for 1 week or so preparing for a match, and then all of a sudden, when you are busy doing the warm-up, and then you're just told that let's pack our bags and go. It's slightly disappointing on the part of the players. Obviously, as a football club, there are obvious costs involved in preparation for matches, and those we have incurred, and we don't know what is going to happen.
Fans have also vented their frustration.
We are confused about what is happening right now. The officials need to find a resolution so that our football is not affected.
We just want to watch and enjoy our football like people in other countries, but here there are always wrangles. They need to fix their differences.
The Sports and Recreation Commission plans to appoint an interim committee to run football affairs. Farai Magutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, in Kenya, a court in Nairobi has given the state 7 days to prosecute ousted FA President Nick Mwendwa, or else the corruption case against him will be closed. Resident Magistrate Wandia Nyamo extended Mwendwa's bail terms of just almost $36,000 on Wednesday and directed him to stay away from the Football Kenya Federation's offices and not to contact Federation employees or attend all football activities. She added detectives were free to summon Mwendwa to help in their investigations whenever they wanted to. The state cited a fictitious cash withdrawals amounting to over $263,000 from FKF and another almost $80,000 that was later wired to private accounts, including that of Mwendwa for his arrest last Friday. Kenya risks a FIFA ban after the government removed Mwendwa and his executive from office and appointed a caretaker committee to manage the country's football for 6 months last week. We'll return to the race for Qatar 2022, and African champions Algeria have advanced to the third round of CAF World Cup qualifying after holding Burkina Faso to a 2-2 draw on Tuesday to finish top of the final Group A standings. Riyad Mahrez put Algeria ahead in the 21st minute, and Zakaria Sanogo pulled Burkina Faso level before halftime in the 37th minute. Sofiane Feghouli restored the Desert Foxes' lead midway through the second half after finishing with US Biliali claiming his second assist of the match. Issoufou Dayo's 84th minute penalty pulled Burkina Faso back on level terms, but the visitors couldn't manage a late winner in a match they needed victory, much to the delight of Algerian coach Jamal Belmadi.
For me, it is not my heart that rules, it is my brain. So if in my heart I have a lot of things that I wish, I'm not putting these things away. The opponent who will present themselves in front of us, we will go and prepare well for the match. The purpose is to qualify for the World Cup, no matter what the cost is. It does not matter which opponent will be in front of us. So we'll study well and prepare well to qualify.
Elsewhere in CAF qualifying, Cameroon beat Cote d'Ivoire 1-0 in Yaoundé to finish top of Group D, as Tunisia beat Zambia 3-1 at the Raids to claim Group B. Nigeria also progressed to the playoff round after drawing 1-0 with Cape Verde to complete the roster of 10 teams that will vie for the 5 African World Cup slots. Morocco, Egypt, Mali, Senegal, DR Congo, and Ghana had earlier sealed their playoff places. In South America, bitter rivals Argentina and Brazil played to a barren draw in the latest Super Classico in a result that left both teams unbeaten in 2022 World Cup qualifying. Brazil coach Tite was critical of an alleged elbow during the end-to-end match with his side, the only team in the 10-team South American